This black woman took in 2 homeless kids. 25 years later, they stopped her life sentence. The phone call that would destroy everything came at 3:17 a.m. As 70-year-old billionaire Evelyn Cross rushed to the hospital where her key witness lay dying, she realized that the 2 homeless children she'd saved 25 years ago were about to lose everything. Their careers, their reputations, their future, all because they refused to abandon the woman who had chosen love over money on one rainy night. Before diving in deep into this story, please do me a favor by subscribing to this channel, hit the like button, and enjoy the story. The sound of rain against bulletproof glass had become Evelyn Cross's evening symphony, but tonight it felt different, like a drumbeat counting down to something she couldn't name. At 70 years old, she had learned to trust her instincts, and right now, every fiber of her being screamed that this storm was washing more than dirt from the city streets below. She pressed her palm against the cool window of her 42nd floor penthouse, watching the lights of Chicago blur and dance through the water cascading down the glass. 25 years in this tower, and she had never felt more like a prisoner in her own castle. The irony wasn't lost on her. A black woman who had clawed her way from a foster care system to owning half the real estate in downtown Chicago, now standing alone in a space that could house 50 families. Her reflection stared back from the darkened window, silver hair pulled into a perfect chignon, designer suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and eyes that had seen too much and felt too little. Or so she told herself. The phone on her marble desk buzzed with the authority of someone who expected immediate attention. She knew without looking that it would be her lawyer, Marcus Sterling, with news about tomorrow's hearing. The federal charges that had been circling her empire like vultures for months were finally ready to strike. Money laundering, tax evasion, conspiracy, words that tasted like ash in her mouth because for the first time in her life, she couldn't buy, intimidate, or strategize her way out. But she didn't reach for the phone. Instead, her eyes drifted to the 2 empty picture frames on her desk, frames that had remained empty for 25 years, not because she had no one to put in them, but because she had been too afraid to admit she had a family worth photographing. The rain intensified, and suddenly she was transported back to another stormy night in 1999. She had been 45 then, already worth millions but still hungry for more, still building walls higher and thicker around her heart. That night, driving home from a business meeting that would add another 0 to her net worth, she had made a decision that changed everything, a decision she had spent decades convinced was merely pragmatic, but tonight realized might have been the only purely loving thing she had ever done. A flash of lightning illuminated the city, and for just a moment, Evelyn could swear she saw 2 small figures huddled under a bridge, ghosts from her past or shadows of her conscience, she couldn't tell which. Her fingers trembled as she finally reached for the phone, but instead of Marcus's number, she found herself scrolling to 2 contacts she hadn't called in 3 years, Grace and Daniel. The children she had saved from the streets, raised in her cold but secure world, and then pushed away when they got too close to the cracks in her armor. Grace, now 34, was a successful civil rights lawyer in New York. Daniel, 32, had become an investigative journalist whose articles had taken down corrupt politicians and exposed corporate scandals. They had both inherited her fierce intelligence and stubborn integrity, but thankfully, they had also developed the capacity for warmth that she had spent a lifetime suppressing. The last time she had seen them was at her 60th birthday party, a sterile affair in this very penthouse where she had watched them exchange glances across the room, communicating in that silent language that families develop. They had tried to reach her, to bridge the gap she had created, but she had retreated behind business talk and expensive wine, terrified of what might happen if she let them see the frightened little girl who still lived somewhere inside her chest. Now, facing the possibility of spending her remaining years in federal prison, Evelyn wondered if her greatest crime wasn't the financial charges they were pressing, but the emotional fraud she had committed against the only 2 people who had ever called her family. Thunder rolled across the sky like God's own judgment, and Evelyn Cross, billionaire, empire builder, woman who had never asked anyone for anything, realized she was about to lose everything she had worked for, and the only people who might still care were the 2 souls she had been too proud and too scared to love properly. What do you think drives someone to push away the very people they care about most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. As she stared into the storm, one question echoed in her mind with the relentless rhythm of the rain. Was it too late for a woman who had spent her life building walls to finally tear them down? The morning after the storm brought a deceptive clarity to Chicago's skyline, as if the rain had washed away all the city's sins except hers. Evelyn sat in her home office, surrounded by the artifacts of a life built on calculated risks and emotional distance. The walls were lined with awards, photographs of her shaking hands with politicians and celebrities, and certificates declaring her one of the most powerful women in America. What they didn't show was the price she had paid for that power. Her deepest fear had always been simple: abandonment. It was a fear born in the cramped dormitory of St. Catherine's Home for Children, where she had learned that love was a luxury she couldn't afford and trust was a weakness that got you hurt. At 8 years old, she had watched her best friend Jenny get adopted, promising to write letters that never came. That night, young Evelyn had made a vow that would shape the next 6 decades of her life. She would never again put herself in a position where someone else's leaving could break her. But fears, like shadows, have a way of manifesting the very thing they seek to avoid. Marcus Sterling arrived at 9 sharp, his usual punctuality made more urgent by the circumstances. He was a small, precise man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, one of the few people who had worked with Evelyn for over a decade without being fired or quitting in frustration. He understood her need for control and her allergy to sentimentality, but he had also seen glimpses of the woman she kept hidden beneath layers of corporate armor. "The federal prosecutors are confident," he said without preamble, settling into the leather chair across from her desk. "They have paper trails, witness testimonies, and enough circumstantial evidence to paint a picture of systematic financial misconduct. Sarah Chun is leading their team. She's young, brilliant, and hungry for a high-profile conviction." Evelyn's jaw tightened. She had built her empire through aggressive but legal tactics, always staying just inside the lines that other people drew. But in business, the lines moved, and sometimes what was acceptable yesterday became criminal today. How long? If convicted on all charges? 25 to life. You die in prison, Evelyn. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Evelyn had faced hostile takeovers, market crashes, and boardroom betrayals, but she had never confronted her own mortality with such stark clarity. At 70, she was still sharp, still formidable, but she was no longer immortal. "There is one avenue we haven't explored," Marcus continued carefully. "Character witnesses. People who can testify to your integrity, your philanthropy, your contributions to the community. It might not prevent conviction, but it could influence sentencing." Evelyn almost laughed. "Marcus, I've spent my entire adult life making sure no one knows me well enough to testify to my character. I have business associates, not friends. I have employees, not family." "That's not entirely true." The words came from the doorway, spoken in a voice that Evelyn hadn't heard in person for 3 years, but that still sent a jolt of recognition through her chest. Grace Patterson. She had taken her adoptive surname after Evelyn refused to let them use Cross, claiming it was too complicated for legal purposes, stood in the doorway of the office, her dark hair shorter than Evelyn remembered, wearing a navy suit that spoke of success hard won. Behind her, filling the doorway with his 6-foot frame, was Daniel Kim. He had kept his birth name, a small rebellion that Evelyn had pretended not to notice. His journalist's eyes swept the room, taking in everything: the empty picture frames, the awards, the careful distance Evelyn maintained from anything that might reveal her heart. "How did you?" Evelyn began, but Grace cut her off. "Marcus called us yesterday. We caught the first flight from New York." Grace's voice was steady, professional, but Evelyn could see the emotion flickering beneath the surface. "We know about the charges." Daniel stepped forward, his camera bag slung over his shoulder, always working, always documenting, just like she had taught him. "We also know you're planning to face this alone, because that's what you do. That's what you've always done." The silence stretched between them, 25 years of complicated love and deliberate distance crystallizing into this moment. Evelyn looked at them, really looked, and saw not the frightened children she had rescued from that bridge, but the accomplished adults they had become despite her emotional limitations. Grace had her father's eyes, she remembered now, warm brown eyes that had looked at her with desperate hope on that rainy night. But she had developed her own strength, evident in the way she stood with her shoulders back and her chin raised, ready for a fight. Daniel had grown into his stubborn streak, the same quality that had made him shield his little sister from the rain, now driving him to shield the world from injustice through his reporting. They were her greatest success and her deepest regret, proof that love could flourish even in the sterile soil of her carefully controlled world. "You didn't raise us to be the kind of people who abandon family when things get difficult," Daniel said quietly. "Even if you never wanted to admit we were family." The word hit Evelyn like a physical blow. Family. The thing she had craved as a child, built accidentally as an adult, and spent decades afraid to acknowledge. She had given them everything except the one thing they had wanted most: her heart, openly and without reservation. Now, standing in her pristine office with its view of the city she had conquered, Evelyn realized that all her walls and defenses had been useless. These two people had somehow found their way past every barrier she had constructed, not through force but through the simple, stubborn act of loving her anyway. "I never wanted you to see me like this," she admitted, the words torn from someplace deep and carefully guarded. "Weak. Vulnerable. Facing the loss of everything I built." Grace moved closer, her lawyer's instincts warring with something more personal and infinitely more complicated. "You think we don't know who you really are? You think we don't remember the woman who made sure we had everything we needed, who pushed us to be better than we thought we could be, who showed up to every school play and graduation even when you pretended it was just business? You loved us the only way you knew how," Daniel added. "But maybe it's time to let us love you back." Marcus cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we should discuss the legal strategy." "No," Evelyn said, her voice stronger than she felt. "They're right. I've spent 70 years afraid of being hurt, and the only thing it's gotten me is hurt anyway. If I'm going to prison, if this is the end of everything, then maybe it's time to stop pretending I don't need anyone." The admission felt like stepping off a cliff, but for the first time in decades, Evelyn Cross was ready to fall. The moment of vulnerability shattered when Evelyn's phone erupted with the harsh buzz of an emergency call. Marcus reached for it, but Evelyn's hand was faster, old habits of control dying hard even in the face of surrender. "Ms. Cross, this is Detective Rodriguez with CPD. We need you to come down to the station immediately. There's been a development in your case." The blood drained from Evelyn's face. Grace and Daniel exchanged worried glances, their professional instincts kicking in. Grace moved to Evelyn's side, while Daniel was already pulling out his phone, likely to call his contacts in law enforcement. "What kind of development?" Evelyn asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Someone came forward this morning claiming to have evidence that could change everything. But ma'am, there's something else. The witness, they say they know about what happened 25 years ago. The night you picked up those kids." The world tilted. Evelyn sank into her chair, the phone nearly slipping from her grip. 25 years of secrets, of carefully buried truths, of a night she had never spoken about to anyone, not even to Grace and Daniel themselves, was about to be dragged into the light. "We'll be right there," she managed, ending the call. The silence in the room was deafening. Grace and Daniel were staring at her with expressions she couldn't read, confusion, concern, and something that might have been recognition. "Evelyn," Marcus said carefully, "is there something about that night you haven't told me? Something that could be relevant to the federal charges?" Before she could answer, Daniel stepped forward, his journalist's instincts fully engaged. "What aren't you telling us? We remember that night, the rain, you stopping the car, taking us to that diner first. But there's something else, isn't there?" Grace's lawyer mind was already working. "If there's a connection between that night and the federal charges, we need to know now, before we walk into that police station blind." Evelyn looked at the two people she loved most in the world, had always loved, even when she couldn't say it, and realized that the fortress she had built around her secrets was about to crumble. The truth she had protected for 25 years was about to destroy not just her, but potentially them as well. "The night I found you," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I wasn't just coming home from a business meeting. I was coming from a deal. A deal that saved my company, but it involved money that wasn't entirely clean. Russian investors who didn't ask questions about where their returns came from." Marcus paled. "Evelyn, please tell me you're not saying. The money I used to build the first phase of Cross Tower, the foundation of everything that came after, it was compromised. I thought I had buried it so deep that no one would ever trace it back. But if someone has evidence from that night—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The irony was crushing. The same night she had saved Grace and Daniel was the night she had made the decision that would ultimately destroy her. She had rescued them from the streets with money that could now send her to prison for the rest of her life. Daniel sank into a chair, the weight of revelation settling over him. "So our entire lives, everything we achieved, it's built on—" "No," Grace interrupted fiercely. "Absolutely not. Don't you dare finish that sentence." She turned to Evelyn, her eyes blazing with a combination of anger and fierce protectiveness. "You want to know what's built on? It's built on the fact that you saw two scared kids and decided to help them. It's built on every meal you made sure we had, every school you fought to get us into, Every time you showed up when we needed you, even when you pretended it was an obligation. But if the money, Evelyn started. The money is numbers on a page, Daniel said, finding his voice again. What you gave us was a chance at life. Whatever deal you made that night, you made it before you knew we existed. You chose us after. Evelyn felt tears she had held back for decades finally break free. I chose you, she whispered. God help me, I saw you under that bridge and I chose you over everything else. Even over my own safety, apparently. The phone buzzed again. This time it was a text message from an unknown number. Ms. Cross, my name is Victor Petrov. We met once, 25 years ago. I think it's time we talked again. The name hit Evelyn like a sledgehammer. Victor Petrov, the Russian businessman who had made her empire possible and who had disappeared into the shadows of international finance. If he was surfacing now, it could only mean one thing. Someone had connected the dots between that long-ago deal and her current troubles. We need to go, Marcus said, seeing her face. Now. But as they prepared to leave for what could be the most important confrontation of her life, Grace caught Evelyn's arm. Whatever happened that night, whatever deal you made, you need to know something. Daniel and I spent years wondering why you chose us. Two black kids that nobody else wanted. And you, a successful businesswoman with no children, no experience with family, you just decided to change your entire life for us. She paused, her voice thick with emotion. We used to think maybe you felt sorry for us. Then we thought maybe it was guilt about your own childhood. But now, seeing you like this, I think I finally understand. You chose us because in that moment, for the first time in your life, you chose love over fear. And that choice, whatever else happened that night, that choice was pure. Daniel nodded, standing beside his sister, not by blood, but by choice and circumstance and 25 years of shared history with this complicated woman who had saved them. So now it's our turn to choose. And we choose you. Whatever's coming, whatever Victor Petrov wants, whatever the police have found, we're not going anywhere. Evelyn looked at them, these two remarkable adults who had grown up despite her fears and because of her love, and realized that the inciting incident wasn't the phone call or the mysterious witness or even the reappearance of Victor Petrov. The real inciting incident was this moment, when she finally understood that the family she had been afraid to claim had already claimed her. The question now was whether that would be enough to save them all. Have you ever had to face the consequences of a choice you made long ago, when the stakes were completely different? Let us know in the comments what you think Evelyn should do next. Outside, storm clouds were gathering again, and Detective Rodriguez was waiting with questions that could unravel not just Evelyn's empire, but the very foundation of the only family she had ever known. The Chicago Police Department's downtown precinct smelled like stale coffee and decades of desperate conversations. As Evelyn walked through the corridors flanked by Grace, Daniel, and Marcus, she felt the weight of every choice she had ever made settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Detective Maria Rodriguez was younger than Evelyn had expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and the kind of exhaustion that came from working too many cases with too few resources. She led them into a sterile interview room where a file folder thick with documents waited on the metal table. Ms. Cross, thank you for coming in so quickly, Rodriguez began, her tone professional but not unkind. I want to be direct with you. This morning, a man named Victor Petrov walked into the FBI field office with documents dating back 25 years. Documents that allegedly show a pattern of money laundering connected to your business empire. Evelyn's face remained impassive, but Grace noticed the slight tremor in her hands. Daniel was already taking notes, his journalist's instincts warring with his personal investment in the outcome. Mr. Petrov claims that in 1999, you entered into a business arrangement with his organization to legitimize funds from questionable sources. He says he has bank records, wire transfer documents, and recorded phone conversations that prove systematic financial crimes spanning decades. Marcus leaned forward. What does Mr. Petrov want in exchange for this information? Rodriguez's smile was thin. That's where it gets interesting. He doesn't want money. He wants to tell a story. About that night in 1999, when Ms. Cross made a choice that apparently didn't sit well with his business associates. The room fell silent. Evelyn could hear her own heartbeat, could feel Grace and Daniel's eyes on her, could sense the careful foundations of her life cracking beneath the pressure of long-buried truths. There's more, Rodriguez continued. Mr. Petrov brought someone with him. Someone who was there that night. Someone who saw what happened after Ms. Cross left the business meeting and before she arrived home. Daniel's pen stopped moving. Who? A man named James Crawford. He was Mr. Petrov's driver back then. Apparently, he followed Ms. Cross's car that night on Petrov's orders. He witnessed her stopping under the bridge, taking 2 children into her vehicle, and driving them to safety. Grace's sharp intake of breath was audible. They were watching us. According to Crawford, Mr. Petrov's associates were concerned about Ms. Cross's emotional stability after she expressed reservations about their arrangement during that final meeting. They wanted to ensure she wouldn't become a liability. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Evelyn remembered now the uncomfortable feeling during that last meeting with Victor, the sense of being evaluated, the way he had asked probing questions about her personal life, her attachments, her potential weaknesses. But here's what Crawford says happened next, Rodriguez continued, opening the file. Instead of going home to her penthouse as expected, Ms. Cross spent the next 3 hours at a 24-hour diner on the south side with 2 homeless children. Crawford watched through the windows as she helped them eat, as she made phone calls, presumably to social services or hospitals, and as she made what he describes as the hardest decision of her life. Marcus was scribbling notes frantically. What decision? According to Crawford, Ms. Cross received a phone call at the diner. Someone, presumably Victor or one of his associates, informing her that they knew about the children and that her new family obligations made her too much of a security risk for future business. The room was spinning. Evelyn gripped the edge of the table, memories flooding back with painful clarity. She remembered that phone call, Victor's cold voice explaining that people with families made poor partners in sensitive business arrangements. She remembered the choice she had faced: abandon Grace and Daniel to the system that had failed her own childhood, or accept that saving them meant the end of her business relationship with the Russians. Ms. Cross chose the children, Rodriguez said softly. Crawford says she told the caller that the deal was off, that she would find other ways to save her company, and that if they came near her kids, she would turn over everything she had to the authorities. Daniel's voice was hoarse. She chose us. She chose you, Rodriguez confirmed. And according to Petrov, that decision has haunted his organization for 25 years. Because Ms. Cross kept her word, she never used their money again, never took another deal with questionable funding. But she also never turned over the evidence she had from that first arrangement. It was, according to Crawford, a Mexican standoff that's lasted a quarter century. Grace was staring at Evelyn with an expression of wonder and heartbreak. You gave up everything. For us. Not everything, Evelyn whispered, finding her voice. I gave up dirty money. I kept what mattered. Marcus was already thinking like a lawyer. So why is Petrov coming forward now? What's changed? Rodriguez's expression darkened. 3 months ago, James Crawford was diagnosed with terminal cancer. He has maybe 6 months to live, and apparently, watching Ms. Cross on trial for financial crimes when he knows she walked away from the real criminal activity, it didn't sit right with him. And Petrov. Victor Petrov is 78 years old. His organization has been under investigation by multiple international agencies. He's looking for a way to clear his conscience before he dies, and apparently, testifying to Ms. Cross's refusal to continue their criminal partnership is part of that. The irony was devastating. Evelyn was facing life in prison for the financial maneuvers she had used to save her company after cutting ties with the Russians, legitimate but aggressive tactics born from her desperate need to build something clean. Meanwhile, the real crime, the original sin that could have destroyed her decades ago, was about to become her salvation. Daniel reached across the table and took his adoptive mother's hand, the first time he had initiated physical contact in years. You saved us twice. Once from the streets, and once from becoming collateral damage in your old life. Grace was crying now, tears streaming down her face as 25 years of complicated emotions finally found release. We thought you were cold. We thought you didn't know how to love us properly. But you loved us enough to risk everything, even before you really knew us. Evelyn squeezed Daniel's hand, her own tears falling freely. I loved you from the moment I saw you protecting Grace under that bridge. Daniel, you were 9 years old and you had already decided to be her shield against the world. How could I not love that? How could I not want to protect that? Rodriguez cleared her throat gently. Ms. Cross, Mr. Petrov and Mr. Crawford are willing to testify on your behalf. Their testimony could potentially clear you of all charges. But there's something you need to understand. Their testimony will also expose details about your past business dealings that weren't included in the current charges. The statute of limitations has run out, so you can't be prosecuted, but the information will become public record. Marcus straightened. What kind of details? Everything. The original money laundering scheme, the Russian connections, the reason you really stopped working with them. Your entire empire's origin story will be rewritten. The weight of the decision settled over them. Evelyn could be cleared of the current charges, but only by admitting to past crimes that would destroy her reputation and potentially implicate other business associates from decades past. She would be free, but her legacy would be in ruins. Unless. There's another option, Grace said quietly, her lawyer's mind working through the implications. We don't just defend against the current charges. We go on offense. We tell the real story, all of it. The orphanage, the original deal, the night you chose us, the 25 years you spent building something legitimate. We make this about redemption, not just legal technicalities. Daniel nodded, his journalist's instincts sensing a bigger story. We control the narrative instead of letting it control us. Rodriguez looked impressed despite herself. That's actually not a bad strategy. But it would mean complete transparency. No more secrets, no more walls. Evelyn looked around the room at the three people who represented everything she valued most. Marcus, her loyal friend, Grace and Daniel, her chosen family. For 70 years, she had protected herself by controlling information, by maintaining distance, by never letting anyone see the whole truth. Now, the only way to save herself was to let everyone see everything. Detective Rodriguez, she said, her voice steady for the first time since they had arrived. I'd like to meet with Mr. Petrov and Mr. Crawford. And then I'd like to tell the world exactly who Evelyn Cross really is. The good, the bad, and everything in between. As they left the police station an hour later, having arranged meetings with both witnesses and begun planning a legal strategy that would either vindicate Evelyn completely or destroy her utterly, Daniel walked beside his adoptive mother and asked the question they were all thinking. Are you ready for this? For everyone to know the truth. Evelyn looked up at the sky, where storm clouds were breaking apart to reveal patches of blue, the first clear sky she had seen in months. I'm ready, she said. For the first time in my life, I'm ready to stop being afraid. But neither she nor her family could have predicted that Viktor Petrov had one more secret to reveal, a secret that would change everything they thought they knew about that night 25 years ago. The meeting was arranged for the next evening at Marcus's law office, neutral ground that felt safer than the sterile government buildings where careers went to die. Evelyn arrived first, her hands steadier than they had been in months, but her heart racing with anticipation. Grace and Daniel flanked her, their professional armor firmly in place, but their personal investment impossible to hide. Viktor Petrov was not what she had expected after 25 years. The intimidating businessman from her memories had been replaced by a frail man in his late 70s, leaning heavily on a carved wooden cane. His once sharp suit hung loose on his diminished frame, and his eyes, which she remembered as cold and calculating, now held the weight of decades and the softness of impending mortality. James Crawford was even more surprising. She remembered him vaguely as a silent presence behind Victor's shoulder, but seeing him now, she realized he couldn't have been much older than she was back then. Cancer had aged him prematurely, but there was something gentle in his demeanor that didn't match her memories of Victor's organization. Ms. Cross, Victor said, his accent still thick but his voice weaker than she remembered. You look well. Success has been kind to you. Has it? Evelyn asked, settling into her chair across from him. I'm facing life in prison for trying to build something legitimate. Victor's smile was sad. Yes, I heard about the charges. Federal prosecutors, they love to make examples of successful people. Especially successful people who look like you and me, outsiders who dared to claim our piece of the American dream. Grace leaned forward, her lawyer instincts engaged. Mr. Petrov, Detective Rodriguez said you have information that could help clear Ms. Cross. But she also mentioned you have something else to tell us about that night. James Crawford shifted uncomfortably in his seat, exchanging a meaningful look with Victor. Ms. Cross, before we begin, I need you to know that everything I'm about to tell you, I've wanted to say for 25 years. But Victor, he made me promise to keep the secret until I was dying, Victor finished quietly. James, tell them. Crawford took a shaky breath, his hands trembling slightly. Whether from illness or emotion, Evelyn couldn't tell. Ms. Cross, that night in 1999, I wasn't just Victor's driver. I was also a father. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Daniel stopped taking notes. Grace's professional composure cracked slightly. Marcus looked confused, but Evelyn felt something cold settling in her stomach. James, Victor said gently, tell them about Rebecca. Crawford's eyes filled with tears. My daughter Rebecca was 16 in 1999. She was struggling. Drugs, bad relationships, living on the streets more often than at home. I tried everything, rehab, counseling, tough love, unconditional love. Nothing worked. He paused, gathering himself. The night of your meeting with Victor, I was supposed to follow you home, make sure you weren't a security risk. But when I saw you stop under that bridge, when I saw you get out of your car in that expensive suit and walk over to those two kids. James saw something else, Victor continued. He saw a third child. A teenage girl, hiding in the shadows, watching everything unfold. The room went completely silent. Evelyn felt the world tilt. Memories she had buried so deep she had convinced herself they were dreams suddenly rushing back with crystalline clarity. Rebecca, Crawford whispered. My Rebecca was there that night. She was the one who told Grace and Daniel to hide under the bridge when they saw your car approaching. She thought you might be a social worker or police. Daniel's pen fell from nerveless fingers. There was another girl. Grace, do you remember? There was an older girl who told us to stay quiet, who said she'd watch for trouble. Grace was staring at Evelyn with a mixture of recognition and disbelief. She had dark hair, really thin, maybe 15 or 16. She said her name was Becca, Evelyn whispered, the memory flooding back. She said her name was Becca. When I asked if she needed help too, she said she was fine, that she was just looking out for the little ones. She lied, Crawford said, his voice breaking. She wasn't fine. She was dying, Ms. Cross. Slowly, from the inside out, and I was losing her piece by piece. Victor leaned forward, his own emotions finally showing. James called me that night after he followed you home. He was crying. I had never seen him cry. He said he had watched you save 2 children, but you had left his daughter behind. The accusation hit Evelyn like a physical blow. I offered. I remember now, I offered to help her too. She said she had family, that she was just helping Grace and Daniel. She was protecting you, Crawford said softly. Rebecca was smart. She knew what I did for work, knew the kind of people Victor associated with. She saw your expensive car, your nice clothes, and she was trying to protect you from getting involved with someone like her, someone connected to people like us. The irony was crushing. A 16-year-old girl desperate and dying on the streets had tried to protect Evelyn from the very criminal connections that Evelyn was already entangled in. What happened to her? Grace asked, though her voice suggested she already feared the answer. Crawford was openly weeping now. She died 3 months later. Overdose. I found her in an abandoned building 6 blocks from where you picked up Grace and Daniel. The silence in the room was deafening. Evelyn felt as though she was drowning in a sea of regret and missed opportunities. For 25 years, she had congratulated herself on saving 2 children, never realizing she had left a third behind. Ms. Cross, Victor said gently, James has carried this guilt for 25 years. He believes that if he had spoken up that night, if he had told you who Rebecca really was, you might have saved her too. But that's not why we're here, Crawford said, fighting to compose himself. We're here because 25 years ago, James watched you make a choice that changed everything. Not just for Grace and Daniel, but for all of us. Victor nodded. After you left with the children, after you called me from that diner and told me the deal was off, James came to me. He said he had watched someone choose love over money, family over profit, risk over safety. He said he had never seen anything like it in our world. It changed me too, Victor admitted. I had built my entire life on the belief that everyone had a price, that love was just another currency to be manipulated. But you, Ms. Cross, you proved me wrong. You walked away from millions of dollars and certain success because 2 children you had known for 3 hours mattered more to you than your own financial security. Crawford wiped his eyes with a tissue Marcus handed him. That night changed the trajectory of Victor's entire organization. He started questioning other deals, other partnerships. Within 5 years, he had completely legitimized his business operations. "Because of you," Victor said simply. "Because James made me see that there was another way to live, another way to succeed. You saved more than Grace and Daniel that night, Ms. Cross. You saved my soul." The revelation was staggering. Evelyn's moment of moral clarity hadn't just changed her own life, it had rippled outward, transforming the lives of people she didn't even know she had touched. But the weight of Rebecca's death settled over her like a shroud. "I should have tried harder. I should have insisted." "No," Grace said firmly. "You can't carry that guilt. You saved who you could save. Rebecca made her own choice to protect you, just like you made your choice to protect us." Daniel reached across the table and covered his adoptive mother's hand with his own. "And because of the choice you made, Grace and I grew up to be people who spend our lives trying to save others. Grace fights for justice in the courtrooms. I expose corruption and abuse of power through my reporting. Your love multiplied, Mom. It's still saving people." The word hit everyone in the room. Mom. After 25 years of careful distance, of Ms. Cross and formal boundaries, Daniel had finally said the word that had been hiding in his heart since he was 9 years old. Evelyn looked at him, then at Grace, then at the two old men who had carried secrets and guilt for a quarter-century, and realized that this moment was the true midpoint of her story. Not the legal charges, not the threat of prison, but this understanding that love was not a finite resource. That choosing to love Grace and Daniel hadn't diminished her capacity to love others, it had expanded it infinitely. "Mr. Petrov, Mr. Crawford," she said, her voice stronger than it had been all evening, "thank you for carrying this burden for so long. Thank you for helping me understand that the choice I made that night wasn't the end of my story, it was the beginning." She turned to Grace and Daniel. "And thank you for waiting 25 years for me to be brave enough to be your mother instead of just your guardian." What would you have done in Evelyn's situation that night? Tried to save everyone or focused on who you could definitely help? Share your thoughts below. As they prepared to leave Marcus's office, Victor had one final surprise. "Ms. Cross, there is something else. Something that will ensure you never face charges like this again, and something that will honor Rebecca's memory in a way that James and I have been planning for many years." The game was about to change once more, but this time, Evelyn Cross was ready for whatever came next. She had her family beside her, her conscience clear, and for the first time in her life, she understood that love wasn't something to be feared, it was something to be multiplied. The call came at 3:17 a.m., shattering the first peaceful sleep Evelyn had enjoyed in months. Marcus's voice was tight with panic. "Evelyn, you need to get to Northwestern Memorial immediately. It's James Crawford. He collapsed at his hotel an hour ago." The drive through empty Chicago streets felt endless. Grace sat in the passenger seat, her lawyer's composure cracking as she processed what Crawford's death might mean for their case. Daniel was silent in the back, his journalist's instincts warring with his personal investment in the man who had carried secrets about their family for 25 years. At the hospital, they found Victor Petrov in the ICU waiting room, looking every one of his 78 years. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hands shaking as he gripped his cane. "The cancer moved faster than anyone expected," he said without preamble. "James." He pushed himself too hard. Coming forward, reliving that night, carrying all that guilt about Rebecca. His body couldn't handle the emotional strain. Dr. Sarah Kim approached them with the careful demeanor of someone who delivered bad news professionally. "Mr. Crawford is stable for now, but he's in a medically induced coma. The cancer has spread to his brain, and the stress of the last few days triggered a series of complications. I'm sorry, but it's unlikely he'll regain consciousness." The words hit like physical blows. Without Crawford's testimony, their entire defense strategy crumbled. Victor could testify to the business arrangements, but he hadn't witnessed Evelyn's choice that night. Crawford was the only person who could verify that she had walked away from the criminal organization to protect Grace and Daniel. "There's something else," Dr. Kim continued. "Mr. Crawford was very insistent about something before he lost consciousness. He kept saying he needed to give something to Evelyn's family. The nurses found this in his personal effects." She handed Evelyn a worn leather journal, its edges frayed from decades of handling. The cover was inscribed with a simple RC in fading gold letters. Victor's breath caught. Rebecca's journal. James carried it everywhere after she died. He said it was all he had left of her. With trembling fingers, Evelyn opened the journal. The handwriting was young, desperate, full of the raw honesty that only comes from someone who has nothing left to lose. The entries were dated, starting 3 years before her death and ending just 2 weeks before the night Evelyn found Grace and Daniel. Grace leaned over her shoulder as they read together. March 15, 1999. Dad's working for those scary Russians again. I told him I was clean, but I'm not. I don't know how to stop. I don't know how to be the daughter he wants me to be. Maybe it's better if I just disappear. April 3, 1999. Met 2 kids living under the bridge near downtown. Grace and Daniel. They're so young, but they take care of each other. Reminds me of me and Dad before I got so messed up. I've been bringing them food when I can. Grace reminds me of myself at her age, before everything went wrong. April 20, 1999. There's a lady who drives by sometimes in a fancy car. She slows down, looks at us, but never stops. Rich people don't help people like us. But sometimes I catch her looking at Grace and Daniel like she sees something in them. Like maybe she remembers being small and scared too. Daniel's voice was hoarse. She was watching you. Before that night, Rebecca was watching you drive by. The final entry was dated the day before Evelyn found them. April 21, 1999. Tomorrow, I think I'm going to try again. Try to get clean, try to go home to Dad. But first, I need to make sure Grace and Daniel are safe. That lady in the expensive car drove by again today. She stopped this time, rolled down her window, but Grace and Daniel ran before she could talk to them. I think she wanted to help. If something happens to me, if I don't make it through tomorrow, I hope someone saves them. They deserve what I couldn't give myself, a real chance. Evelyn's tears fell onto the journal pages, blurring Rebecca's careful handwriting. The girl hadn't just been protecting Evelyn that night. She had been orchestrating Grace and Daniel's rescue, ensuring they would be safe even if she couldn't save herself. She knew, Grace whispered. Rebecca knew she was dying, and she spent her last night making sure we would live. But the crushing revelation was interrupted by Marcus's phone buzzing with an emergency call. His face went white as he listened. That was Sarah Chun, the federal prosecutor, he said, his voice hollow. Someone leaked the story about Victor and James coming forward. It's all over the news, the Russian connections, the money laundering charges, everything. But they're spinning it differently. He showed them his phone. The headline on the Chicago Tribune's website read, "Billionaire's Desperate Gambit. Cross enlists Russian mobsters to escape justice." The article painted Evelyn's cooperation with Victor as a calculated move to escape conviction, suggesting that she was still connected to criminal organizations and using them to manufacture fake evidence. Worse, it identified Grace and Daniel by name, describing them as accomplices in Cross's elaborate deception scheme. "They're destroying us," Daniel said, scrolling through social media where the story was already viral. "Look at these comments. People are calling Grace and me criminals, saying we're just as corrupt as our crime boss mother." Grace's phone was ringing constantly, reporters, former clients, her law firm's managing partners. Her professional reputation, built over decades of fighting for justice, was crumbling in real time. "I have to resign from the firm," she said, her voice breaking. "They can't be associated with this scandal. All my cases, all my clients who trusted me." "No," Evelyn said fiercely. "This is my fault. I won't let you sacrifice your careers for my mistakes." But it was too late. Daniel's editor at the Washington Post was already calling, expressing concerns about his objectivity, and suggesting he take an extended leave of absence. Grace's law firm issued a statement distancing themselves from her alleged involvement in organized crime activities. In one night, everything they had built, Evelyn's empire, Grace's legal career, Daniel's journalism reputation, was being systematically destroyed by people who saw only headlines and dollar signs, not the complex truth of love and sacrifice and redemption. Victor struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on his cane. "This is my fault. I should have known they would twist our testimony. In my world, Ms. Cross, good intentions are always turned into weapons by people who profit from cynicism." "It's not your fault," Evelyn said, but even she could hear the defeat in her voice. "It's mine. I should never have involved you in this. I should never have put Grace and Daniel at risk." "So what do we do now?" Daniel asked. "James is dying. our reputations are destroyed, and the prosecution has turned our evidence into proof of guilt instead of innocence. The hospital waiting room fell silent except for the mechanical sounds of life support machines down the hall, machines keeping James Crawford alive while his secrets died with him. "We have two choices," Marcus said quietly. "Evelyn pleads guilty to the federal charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. She serves maybe 10 years instead of life, and Grace and Daniel can try to rebuild their careers after the media attention dies down." "Or?" Grace asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer would be devastating. "Or we fight. We go to trial with Victor's testimony alone, knowing that the prosecution will paint us as a criminal conspiracy. We risk everything on the chance that a jury will see through the media narrative to the truth underneath." Evelyn looked at the two people she loved most in the world, Grace and Daniel, whose lives she had saved 25 years ago and now seemed destined to destroy. They had given up everything to stand by her, and she had repaid their loyalty by dragging them into a scandal that could end their careers permanently. In that sterile hospital waiting room, surrounded by the smell of antiseptic and the weight of impossible choices, Evelyn Cross faced the darkest moment of her 70-year life. She had built an empire only to watch it crumble. She had found a family only to see them suffer for their loyalty to her. And somewhere in a hospital bed 20 feet away, the man who could have saved them all was slipping away, taking their last hope with him. "I know what I have to do," Evelyn said finally, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I'm going to plead guilty. I'm going to accept whatever sentence they give me. And I'm going to make sure that Grace and Daniel are free to rebuild their lives without my shadow hanging over them." "Mom, no," Daniel said, the word coming naturally now despite the circumstances. "We're not abandoning you." "You're not abandoning me," Evelyn replied. "You're saving yourselves. It's what I should have insisted on from the beginning." But as she spoke the words that felt like a death sentence, none of them noticed Viktor Petrov pulling out his phone and making a call that would change everything. "My dear," he said quietly into the phone, speaking in rapid Russian. "It's time. Bring everything. Tonight." The darkest hour was about to give way to a dawn none of them could have imagined. But first, they would have to survive the longest night of their lives. The woman who walked into Northwestern Memorial's ICU waiting room at 4:30 a.m. moved with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room she entered. She was perhaps 50, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. Victor struggled to his feet as she approached, his face lighting up with something that looked almost like relief. "Katerina," he said simply. "Papa," she replied, kissing both his cheeks in the European fashion before turning her attention to Evelyn, Grace, and Daniel with appraising eyes. "This is my daughter," Victor explained. "Katerina Petrovchan. She runs our legitimate operations." Marcus looked up from his phone where he had been fielding calls from reporters. "Chun?" As in Sarah Chun, the federal prosecutor. Katerina's smile was sharp. "My daughter. And before you ask, no, she doesn't know I'm here. Sarah has built her career on integrity and independence, and I've made sure she never had to compromise either for family loyalty." The implications hit everyone simultaneously. The prosecutor leading the charge against Evelyn was the daughter of Victor's daughter, making her Victor's granddaughter. "Sarah doesn't know about our family's colorful past," Katerina continued. "As far as she's concerned, her grandfather was a legitimate businessman who immigrated from Russia in the 1970s. Which, technically, has been true for the last 20 years. Grace found her voice first. "You're saying the federal prosecutor trying to put Evelyn in prison is your daughter, and she has no idea her grandfather used to be involved in money laundering?" "My daughter is brilliant, ethical, and completely incorruptible," Katerina said with obvious pride. "She's also been manipulated by people who care more about headlines than justice. But that's about to change." She opened an elegant briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. 25 years ago, my father made the decision to legitimize our entire organization because of what he witnessed between Ms. Cross and two homeless children. What he didn't tell you yesterday is that he kept meticulous records of that transformation." Victor nodded weakly. "Every dollar we cleaned, every legitimate investment we made, every criminal connection we severed, I documented it all. I knew that someday, someone would question how we became legitimate so quickly." "These documents," Katerina continued, "show a complete financial transformation beginning in May 1999, 1 month after the night my father followed Ms. Cross. Bank records, investment portfolios, legal contracts, employment records for former associates who were transitioned into legitimate work. Daniel leaned forward, his journalist instincts engaged despite his exhaustion. You're talking about millions of dollars, probably hundreds of people. You transformed an entire criminal organization. Ms. Cross showed us that it was possible to choose differently, Victor said. If she could walk away from certain success to protect 2 children she barely knew, then we could walk away from criminal profits to build something that wouldn't destroy lives. But Marcus was frowning. Even if that's true, it doesn't change the evidence against Evelyn. The prosecution has documentation of aggressive financial tactics she used after 1999 to save her company. Aggressive but legal, Katerina corrected. Which brings me to the second folder. This one was thinner, but somehow felt more significant. For the past 3 months, our forensic accounting team has been analyzing every financial transaction Cross Enterprises made since 1999. We found something interesting. She spread documents across the waiting room table. Ms. Cross, you've been systematically overpaying your taxes for 25 years. Not by small amounts, by millions of dollars annually. Your accountants must have been pulling their hair out. Evelyn looked confused. I don't understand. My financial team handles. Your financial team follows your standing orders, Katerina interrupted. Orders you gave in 1999 to ensure that every penny of profit from Cross Enterprises was beyond reproach. You've been voluntarily paying a 50% higher tax rate than legally required because you never wanted to risk even the appearance of impropriety. The revelation was stunning. For 25 years, Evelyn had been voluntarily impoverishing herself to ensure her business stayed completely clean. But there's more, Katerina said, pulling out a third folder. The federal investigation was triggered by an anonymous tip 3 months ago. Someone sent the FBI detailed financial records suggesting money laundering activities. We traced the source. Grace's legal training kicked in. Who? Richard Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Industries. Your primary competitor for the Millennium Tower project that would have been worth $800 million to whichever company won the contract. The name hit Evelyn like a physical blow. Richard Blackwood had been circling her company for years, trying to find weaknesses he could exploit. She had outbid him for 3 major projects in the past decade, and each loss had made him more desperate. Blackwood manufactured evidence, Daniel said, the full scope of the conspiracy becoming clear. He fed the FBI just enough real financial information to make his fabrications look credible. Exactly, Katerina confirmed. And when the FBI investigation began, he used his media contacts to ensure the story would destroy your reputation even if you were acquitted. Marcus was already pulling out his phone. This changes everything. If we can prove the investigation was triggered by false information from a business competitor. We already have, Katerina said. Our legal team delivered everything to the FBI field office an hour ago. They're reviewing the evidence now. But Victor held up a trembling hand. There's something else. Something that will ensure this never happens to your family again. He pulled out one final document, this one bearing official government seals and signatures. The Department of Justice has been investigating international money laundering operations for the past 5 years. Our cooperation in exposing other criminal organizations has been extensive. Grace read over the document, her eyes widening. This is a formal agreement granting immunity to anyone who provided material assistance in the investigation. It's signed by the Attorney General. Ms. Cross, your decision 25 years ago to walk away from our organization didn't just save you from criminal liability, it made you an inadvertent witness to our transformation. Legally speaking, you've been an asset to federal law enforcement for 2.5 decades without even knowing it. The hospital waiting room was silent except for the steady beeping of medical equipment down the hall. In the space of 30 minutes, everything had changed. The federal charges would be dropped. Richard Blackwood would face investigation for filing false reports and market manipulation. Evelyn's reputation would be not just restored but enhanced. But Daniel was staring at Katerina with sudden understanding. You said Sarah doesn't know about her grandfather's past. But she's about to find out, isn't she? When all this comes to light, her own career could be destroyed by association. Katerina's composed facade cracked slightly. My daughter built her career on prosecuting financial crimes because she believed in justice. When she learns that her family's legitimate wealth came from reformed criminal activity, it will devastate her. Unless, Grace said slowly, the story is told the right way. By the right people. Evelyn looked around the room at the faces of people who had risked everything to save her. Victor, who had spent 25 years atoning for his past. Katerina, who was about to sacrifice her daughter's peace of mind for justice. Marcus, who had never stopped believing in her innocence. And Grace and Daniel, who had chosen to love her despite everything. Katerina, Evelyn said, what if we control how this story comes out? What if instead of your daughter learning about her grandfather's transformation through media reports and FBI briefings, she learns it from us? From the people who were there, who can explain not just what happened, but why it mattered. Victor's eyes brightened with hope he hadn't dared feel. You would do that? Help us tell Sarah the truth in a way that honors what we've all become rather than condemning what we used to be. 25 years ago, you helped me understand that love multiplies, Evelyn replied. That when we choose to protect each other, we create ripples that extend far beyond what we can see. Sarah Chun is your granddaughter, but she's also a person who has dedicated her life to justice. She deserves to know that justice can include redemption. Daniel was already thinking like a journalist. We tell the complete story. The original crimes, the moment of transformation, the 25 years of legitimate success, and the family that was built on choosing differently. And we do it together, Grace added. All of us. As a family that includes everyone who was changed by that night 25 years ago. For the first time since they had arrived at the hospital, Victor smiled. Not the careful smile of an old man protecting secrets, but the genuine smile of a grandfather who might yet see his granddaughter understand that people can choose to become better than they were. James would have liked this, he said softly, looking toward the ICU where Crawford lay dying. He always believed that Rebecca's sacrifice should mean something bigger than just saving Grace and Daniel. Now it will save Sarah too, in a different way. As dawn broke over Chicago, painting the hospital windows with golden light, Evelyn Cross realized that the turning point hadn't been about evidence or legal strategies or even family loyalty. It had been about the moment when all of them, former criminals and current saints, birth families and chosen families, prosecutors and defendants, recognized that they were part of the same story of transformation. The question now wasn't whether Evelyn would survive her legal troubles. The question was whether they could all survive the beautiful, terrifying process of becoming who they were meant to be all along. And for the first time in her 70 years, Evelyn was certain of the answer. The emergency meeting took place in the federal building's largest conference room, hastily arranged when FBI Director Patricia Williams personally reviewed Katerina's evidence at dawn. By 8 a.m., the room was filled with people whose lives had been forever intertwined by events from 25 years ago, though most of them were only now discovering those connections. Sarah Chun sat at the head of the table, her usual prosecutorial confidence shaken by the morning's revelations. She was staring at documents that proved her grandmother, a woman she had never known existed, had orchestrated one of the largest criminal organization transformations in FBI history. Evelyn entered the room flanked by Grace and Daniel, with Marcus carrying briefcases full of evidence that would clear her name. But her attention was immediately drawn to Sarah Chun, a woman in her early 30s with Victor's sharp intelligence and Katerina's determined chin, who looked as though her entire worldview had been shattered and rebuilt in the space of 3 hours. Ms. Cross, Sarah said, her voice carefully controlled, I owe you an apology. I've spent 3 months building a case against you based on fabricated evidence, and I never questioned the source because the financial complexity seemed to support the allegations. You were doing your job, Evelyn replied, taking a seat across from her. You had no reason to suspect that Richard Blackwood would manufacture evidence to destroy a business competitor. FBI Director Williams placed a thick folder on the table. Mr. Blackwood has been arrested on charges of filing false federal reports, market manipulation, and conspiracy to defraud. His media contacts who helped spread the story are also under investigation. But Sarah was looking at her mother, Katerina, with an expression that combined hurt, confusion, and grudging admiration. How long have you known that I was investigating someone connected to our family? 3 months, Katerina admitted. When I realized you were prosecuting Ms. Cross, I had to choose between protecting your career and protecting the truth. I chose truth. Victor, who had been silent since entering the room, finally spoke. Sarah, I know this is difficult. Learning that your grandfather was involved in criminal activity, that your entire family history is built on secrets. No, Sarah interrupted, her prosecutor's training helping her find clarity in chaos. That's not what's difficult. What's difficult is learning that my grandfather spent 25 years building something legitimate and meaningful, and I almost destroyed an innocent woman because I was too proud to question my own assumptions. She turned to Evelyn with tears in her eyes. Ms. Cross, I've read every document, every bank record, every witness statement. Not just about the charges against you, but about what happened that night in 1999. You saved Grace and Daniel, but you also saved my grandfather. You showed him that people can choose to be better than they were. Daniel had been quietly taking notes, but now he looked up. Sarah, can I ask you something? As a prosecutor, as someone who has dedicated her career to justice, what do you think justice looks like in this situation? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her lawyer's mind working through implications and precedents. Justice looks like the truth being told completely. Not just about the false charges, but about everything. About how someone can transform themselves, about how love can ripple outward in ways we never expect, about how families are built through choice as much as blood. Grace leaned forward. Are you suggesting a public statement? I'm suggesting something bigger, Sarah said, her voice gaining strength. I'm suggesting that we control this narrative from the beginning. Ms. Cross, would you be willing to hold a press conference where you tell the complete story? Not as a defendant trying to clear her name, but as someone who has something important to teach about redemption and family. FBI Director Williams looked intrigued. That's unconventional. But given the media attention this case has generated, a comprehensive public statement might serve justice better than sealed court documents. Victor was struggling with his emotions. Sarah, are you certain? Once this story is public, everyone will know about our family's past. Your career, your reputation. Grandfather, Sarah said, using the word for the first time in her life, my career is built on the pursuit of justice. If I can't stand behind a story about people choosing to become better, about love transforming criminal organizations into legitimate businesses, about families that cross all boundaries of blood and law, then I don't deserve the career I've built. Evelyn felt something shifting inside her, the final walls around her heart crumbling as she realized that this moment was about more than clearing her name. This was about telling a story that could inspire others to make different choices, to build different families, to believe in the possibility of transformation. There's something else, she said, looking around the table at all the faces, some familiar, some new, all connected by invisible threads of love and choice and consequence. James Crawford is dying in a hospital room 20 floors above us, carrying the guilt of not being able to save his daughter Rebecca. But Rebecca saved Grace and Daniel by making sure I found them. And finding them saved me, which saved Victor's organization, which led to Sarah's career in justice. She paused, the magnitude of it all settling over her. James thinks he failed as a father, but his daughter's final act set in motion a chain of events that has touched dozens of lives across 25 years. That's not failure, that's a legacy. Daniel closed his notebook and looked at his adoptive mother with something approaching awe. You want to tell Rebecca's story too. As part of all of this. I want to tell the truth, Evelyn said simply. All of it. The ugly parts and the beautiful parts and everything in between. Because maybe somewhere out there is another scared businesswoman driving past another bridge where children are hiding, and maybe she needs to know that stopping the car can change everything. Sarah was nodding, her prosecutor's strategic mind already working. We do this together. All of us. You tell your story, I explain how the false charges were manufactured and why they're being dropped. Victor and my mother describe the transformation of their organization, and Grace and Daniel speak to what it means to be chosen family. And we honor James, Crawford, and Rebecca, Grace added. We make sure people understand that every choice we make ripples outward, that love multiplies, that families are built through courage and commitment, not just genetics. FBI Director Williams was looking at the group with something that might have been admiration. In 30 years of law enforcement, I've never seen anything quite like this. A case that started with financial crimes and ended with, what would you call this? Redemption, Victor said quietly. And proof that it's never too late to choose differently. The press conference was scheduled for that afternoon in the Federal Building's main auditorium. As they prepared to leave the conference room, Sarah Chun approached Evelyn privately. Ms. Cross, I have one more question. That night in 1999, when you saw Grace and Daniel under the bridge, what made you stop? What made you choose differently? Evelyn thought for a moment, remembering the rain, the fear in the children's eyes, the way Daniel had tried to shield Grace with his small body. "I saw myself," she said finally. "I saw the child I had been, the one who never got rescued. And I realized that sometimes we get the chance to save ourselves by saving someone else." Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile she had shown all day. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." 3 hours later, as Evelyn Cross stood before a room full of reporters and cameras, with her chosen family beside her and her past finally illuminated instead of hidden, she understood that this moment was the true climax of her story. Not the legal vindication, not the clearing of charges, but this act of complete vulnerability in service of a larger truth. 25 years ago, she began, her voice steady and clear, I was a successful businesswoman who had never learned how to love properly. On a rainy night in April 1999, 2 children changed that forever. And as she told the story, all of it, the beautiful and the painful and the transformative, Evelyn Cross finally understood what it meant to be free.